Clara, but you can call me Mother, and welcome to another part of the Studio Yutani Megacast that we're doing for Alien Day. Now, this is pretty much our last interview for like the whole 14 hours that I've managed to record from all of these amazing people who've been able to contribute. But this interview has been a long time coming. I've been stalking Gabriel Hardman on Twitter. And finally, he's given in, and he's with me today. Hi, Gabriel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you doing in this whole lockdown / pandemic?
It's obviously been a little trying. We're in Los Angeles, and I, otherwise work in the entertainment business, and most of that's shut down. So it's a thing, but at least up till now, we're in a relatively privileged position. Everybody's healthy, and and my wife is still working. She's a writer as well, but she also works at the Natural History Museum in the dinosaur lab, and she's working from home currently, but she still has a job. I still had a job on a movie until last week, but I'm doing some other stuff in between. Hopefully it'll come back. It's not, we don't have anything too catastrophic going on compared to so many other people.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I remember asking you for this interview back when your comic book, a comic series came out, and since then, it's been released in hardcover.
Yeah.
So, I've also read your Green Lantern Earth one, mm-hmm. and also the Belfry, which mm-hmm. I totally love.
Oh, great. Because it's great, but yeah.
Yeah, I apart from fangirling about your work and Karina's work as well, mm-hmm. what kind of made you want to do a story in the Alien universe, and what made you want to become a comic artist in general?
Well, it's certainly what drew me to. The James Cameron movie Aliens had an enormous impact on me when I was 12 years old. I saw it in the theater. It was the most intense experience of my life at that point. And then, soon after saw the Ridley Scott movie, at home on VHS, there was just such, I just relate deeply to the intense scariness of the xenomorph, and it feels like, in the movie Forbidden Planet, they call it the creature from the id, but to me, that's what the xenomorph is. It's just this embodiment of, visual embodiment of, a kind of, deep primal horror that, that I felt very much as a kid and has never left me. So particularly the fact that it's so visual, feels like something that I could do in a comic. There's a lot of stuff that, from other media that just doesn't work that well in comics necessarily. Comics are, when it comes down to it, comics are static images on a page, and you have to make them charismatic or scary or whatever just through the craft and the form and the way that you present it. But to me, at least me personally, the visual of the xenomorph is so iconic and deeply scary to me that I felt like that was just something I could do something with. And and as far as doing comics, I had a storyboard. I work as a storyboard artist in the rest of my life. I work on films. I have since my early 20s. And at a certain point, 10 years ago or so, I just wanted, I wanted to do something a little more directly creative. Working for, there's a lot of creative work that I do on films, working for other directors, but it's still fulfilling their vision. So I really wanted to do something that was more directly, writing and drawing, telling all of the story. So I've done quite a bit of freelance work in that world, that I own as well. But Karina and I, my wife and I together we did a Planet of the Apes series. We did a Star Wars series as well for Dark Horse for Randy Stradley. I, you know, and I'd done a little Star Trek thing, and I, you know, and at a certain point, I felt like, well, I've done all of these, you know, the licensed franchise type things that I am interested in, except for Alien. You know, I mean, that's the one, you know, that that I love and I'd be interested in doing. And so I literally just said on Twitter, well, I'm done with licensed comics because I've done all the ones that I want to, except for Alien, and we'll see if that ever happens. And then the next morning, I got an email from Randy at Dark Horse, you know, who had been our editor on Star Wars, and he was like, "Okay, so I hear you want to do an Alien book." So, you know, so I was like, "Yeah, I do," and he was like, "Okay, well, pitch me something." And basically, I wrote like 3 pitches, 3 short, you know, springboard type pitches.
Can you tell us the other pitches?
No, because what if there's some reason I want to do those at some point?
That's true. Okay.
And then you know, he approved the one that turned out to be Dust to Dust, and it just happened. You know, it was very simple, and I mean, the part where I had to make the rest of my schedule work in order to get the book done, it was not so simple. But like actually it coming together was very straightforward, and that's what's great about working with Randy. He's one of my favorite editors, and he's, you know, and like he's smart and super knowledgeable about comics, and, you know, knows not to, you know, he knows when to step in and when not to, and, you know, that's perfect for me.
Was there any certain amounts of research that you did before diving into the comic, or was this story brewing for a while, and you kind of have this universe in mind constantly where you're trying to like reconcile all of these things that are happening?
This was the story that I told was the story I wanted to tell. So I'm glad that was the one he picked. It, you know, because very, very often, if you pitch something, or like if you do a cover for a comic or whatever, you submit multiple ideas, and they always pick the worst one. You know, they pick the one that you don't want to do.
Really?
And in this instance, he picked the one I did want to do. So, and it was, you know, it was the one that I found very directly relatable. And like, if you read my Dust to Dust story, it's very much about the point of view of this kid, right? It's not about a broader top-down understanding of the world. So it was really important to me that it felt like we were seeing it from this limited perspective, where you know, as a kid, you don't have agency, you don't have the things that, you know, I mean, it's obviously to some extent a coming of age story, which is not something that I particularly like necessarily, but the fact that this was so brutal and difficult made it more appealing to me. And but like it was super important to me that it felt like the way that some, you know, a 12-year-old can look at the world with a limited understanding of what's going on. So if we had external things that were telling us, you know, exactly where we were in the universe of aliens, if we, you know, if we had the perspective of, you know, the kinds of third-person, you know, omniscient perspectives that, you know, that you might have in something else, I think that for me, that takes away the immediacy and the scariness of it, and the, you know, the visceral quality that is the reason that I'm doing it at all.
Yeah, that's true. I know that when you wrote this, you kind of intended it to be like not particularly linked to anywhere in the Aliens timeline, except for maybe around the time that Aliens happens. Because the existence of the ridge top head aliens. So like, how do you feel about people trying to tie it to canon? Is that something that would bother you, or does it affect you either way?
Yeah, it's fine with me. I mean, like, the book's still on the shelf, you know? I mean, it doesn't, you know, the book is the book, and if, you know, if people have ideas about when it would take place, if people have ideas about how it would tie in with other stuff, that's great. That's fine with me. You know, I mean, like, I still don't want to pin it down like that, because to me, that's not the story.
Yeah. Do you feel like it limits you artistically when people try to tie it into everything else? No,
the book's done. There's no way to limit me artistically. I mean, I don't know that it's possible. I don't know that the current status of everything and the license and everything. I mean, but I certainly would like to do sequel books at some point. But like which would get more specific because they would not be about a 12-year-old. They would be about this character further on in his life. But I don't know that that's even possible because of the licensing situation.
Yeah, things are looking pretty dire at the moment. I know everyone's who has like at least some sort of like ownership of the license with Dark Horse and with Titan Books, that they're trying to get out as much content as possible until you know it expires, the deal or whatever. So hopefully in future, Disney, please. So my co-admin at Aliens Gateway Station, which is a Facebook group about the extended universe of Alien, submitted some questions for me to ask. So I'll go through some of them now, and then I'll go through a couple of questions of my own.
Yep.
Right, so here are the questions that I've got from Bradley John Sweetbeck at Aliens Gateway Station. So he said, with respect to the android having its head cut off so that the young boy could more easily carry him around, what are your thoughts on the same idea occurring again in other Alien publications? It since has been used in a book called Alien Echo, and also in another book called Alien Prototype.
Well, I mean, if those were already around, I didn't know about them. I mean, just to me,
but they were after you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I mean that's cool. I mean, to me, it just feels like a very like visceral, disturbing thing that, and like I like dislocation. So I mean, if there is some, not just literally somebody's head coming off, but like that feeling of separation. That feeling of separation is literally what this whole story is about. So making him forcibly do it to the other guy, which is, I mean, traumatic. It's no matter what, Maxon thinks of this guy. This is a traumatic thing to have to do to somebody, whether you understand that they're synthetic or not. It's, like I just wanted to be able to. I mean, look, if I had more pages, it would have been more gory and more difficult, but like, I really just felt like it was something where I could put him in, a further, even worse position than he's in order to get where they needed to go. As far as like other people using that, great. I mean, I don't think it's the most creative thing in the world for me to have come up with or anything. So, I mean, I think it's just something that served dramatically and is a very sort of visceral, iconic thing. I just enjoyed it. I mean, obviously there's, plenty of, there's the Reanimator precedent for this, and, a lot of other stuff. Certainly I thought about Reanimator.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, people said that they felt like you did it better because, I
appreciate it.
Okay.
Maybe those other people hadn't seen Reanimator. I don't know.
No, maybe not. Who knows? but it's I guess decapitation is a very common trope in the Alien universe. Yeah. They've effectively used it like in Alien and in Alien Covenant. Sorry. In parts of Alien Covenant and so on. So
well, yeah, I mean, that's a whole thing at the end of Prometheus. I mean, with the guy with his head cut off and he's talking. It's not like it's not some new and brilliant idea. It's just, but it is effective, and it is a thing that it just made sense for the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's unique that kind of everyone can bring their own way of doing it. To whatever medium they're working in.
Yeah, and I think that there are specific things within this world that you can use in slightly different ways to get different effects, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, people have brought up the Newt thing over and over again, and it like, to me, that only sort of makes sense in that Newt was a kid in this world, but the movie is not from Newt's point of view. It's not a movie about Newt, and so like it's a movie about Ripley and Ripley's point of view of this kid and feeling nurturing. And what I was trying to do was 180 degrees from that,
Yeah, like it's kind of like focusing in on the fear of what it would be like to try to be a kid and try to survive this.
Well, yeah, and also not, what, Ripley is finding a way to deal with her situation, and also she's, using these, these feelings of, like finding her way into feeling, nurturing and protective of Newt. I mean, and obviously there's the kind of director's cut special edition version of Aliens that, that suggests that Ripley had a daughter and this is sort of replacing that. And those kind of maternal feelings are totally the opposite. I mean, kids don't feel that. Kids are feeling, feel abandoned and not, and there's a catharsis through, for Newt through Ripley taking care of her, and it's from Ripley's point of view. This is not, my story isn't so much about a catharsis as about having to take responsibility and growing up,
Yeah, definitely. All right, one of the other questions that Brad had was when the story starts off, there's no background. It sort of jumps right into the middle of the action, and we get bits of background as the story progresses. And he says it was a bit refreshing and felt less linear than the other comics. Was there a conscious choice to give the story more depth and uniqueness, or did this sort of just happen that way naturally? Was there another, version of this comic that never made it?
No, this was it. It always started this way. There was never any more. There was never more backstory. It's that, I mean, this is just something that I find very appealing storytelling wise. And it also, going back to what I was talking about comics essentially being, still images, ink on paper, or, pixels, you have to go above and beyond to grab people, right? You don't have the experience of sitting in a theater and being immersed in that world. You have to bring people in. And so, like, you have to use everything that you have to do that. And to me, that was, just start in the middle of it, in media res, I mean, like, and I feel like that most of the time for storytelling. I also feel like, some of the influences that I have just storytelling wise, I mean, I like Harold Pinter. I like David Mamet, well, I mean, I don't like David Mamet's politics, but I like the work that David Mamet did. And, I think that, like, and I always look beyond whatever the genre, the format, or whatever, for inspiration other places for stuff that I can bring in, so that so that it's not a kind of incestuous little world of comics that are about comics or stuff like that. I always want more input and try to bring something different to it. And part of that is even if I fail, trying to have the confidence to go out on a limb and ask the reader to go with me, like not ask them to buy into this, even if I'm not holding their hand and giving them and spoon feeding them all the information. I don't like storytelling like that. I don't like things that, tell me everything up front and then have everything play out. I just want to get it as we go, like a stage play, almost like the way in a play, you are almost always thrown into something and you decipher, what's going on with the characters and what's going on with the circumstance they're in over the course of the play, rather than, being spoon-fed a lot of exposition.
Is there any particular part of this comic series that you were really proud of, like whether it be artwork or a specific page or character or component in the story?
Well, I mean, I'll always feel like the artwork isn't good enough, but certainly the opening of it is something that I like. I like one of my favorite bits in is when the kid realizes he has a shard of glass in his face. You know, I mean, it's uncomfortable and it feels relatable, and, you know, and it's not, and like, it's a, you know, a way to express that kind of discomfort in a way that we can immediately understand. You know, we, even though you know, I mean, I was talking about how much I love the xenomorph and the impact of that visual, but we don't, in our lives, often, you know, almost get killed by xenomorphs. But like that visceral feeling of, you know, having glass stuck in you or something like that is, to me, is a shortcut to, you know, to the intensity and the scariness. And I love horror, and I love, you know, but I love the, you know, I love horror that makes you feel stuff and where you care. You know, I don't like, rather than slasher movies or something where you're rooting for people to die. I want you to care about our characters, you know?
Yeah, I can see. Okay, so Brett also says, if he remembers correctly, you described the working components of the atmosphere processes being large vats filled with algae that produce oxygen. Mm-hmm. In other alien lore, the atmosphere processes on LV-46, for example, were based on nuclear fusion to produce oxygen, or something more radiologically or chemically based rather than biologically based. Yeah. He's a scientist, by the way, so this is why it's so technical.
Yeah, totally.
In his mind, he viewed the atmosphere processes being a lot like water treatment plants. There's a lot of different technologies, methods for treating water, and depending on the contaminants of concern, one technology might be better suited for one job than the other. Did that sort of thought process go into this particular part of the story's version of the atmosphere processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I wanted it to be something different. I wanted it to not be that, you know, we just get there and there's the countdown to when it blows up the way, cause if you introduce a gun, you got to use it. So, I mean, if it was a situation like in Aliens or something, it would feel like I had to do that. It feel like I was obliged to do that. And so, and I wanted a different way to do it. I talked to Karina about it. She has a science background. I mean, she has a zoology degree and she has a science background. And she, knows a lot of popular science stuff. And that was definitely, I wanted something that didn't feel repetitive with the other things, and also felt like each thing that you give people, since I've basically set up the storytelling rules where I'm not really going to give you much of anything, right? You have to figure out what these things mean for that whole world, right? So if I'm saying this, presumably, you're inferring that this world isn't amenable to the, to the nuclear, processing thing, or that or that somebody learned a lesson in how badly that can go prior to this, since this is clearly set after, Aliens.
Yeah.
So, that was my hope, to suggest that. I always want to suggest things, and I always want people to pick up on it, and I never want to tell them straight out.
That's really cool, though. I think Brad will really appreciate that.
Yeah.
He's also asked, the mother in the story, which spawned the alien, obviously it retained memories and emotions from its host. It may
or may not have. Yeah.
This was a theory that has been circulating around in the fandom for a while, starting with Kane and the way in which the first alien killed Lambert. Did you find inspiration in that theory for your story?
Yes. Yeah, but my feeling about it is that that there's no guarantee that that's what's happening. I mean, it's all about subjectivity. The whole book is about the kid's perspective and the subjective, angle. And so if the kid gets this idea in his head, then maybe that's inflecting the way that we read the book. Maybe it is. Maybe that's what's really happening. Maybe the xenomorph has other motives that we aren't even capable of understanding. So, I mean, like,
so the kid's just projecting what he wants to see.
No, I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I mean, I feel like that's the question that the book is answering. And I'm much more interested in asking questions and having people come to them than I am in solving that. Right. So, I mean, yes, the theory absolutely was influential, but what I did not want to do was answer the question. Right. I mean, if the question is that how it works, then that makes the xenomorphs less scary, and I don't want to do that. Like, what I want is to ask a question that, in this very subjective world of the story, is, you know, you can come away with it and argue whether it is or it isn't, you know. And my hope is that it's ambiguous enough that it feels like it could credibly go either way.
I think that's what I kind of love about people who create stories in the alien universe. They allow this certain amount of ambiguity with concepts and theories, and that's what generates conversation and fandom constantly talking about it and debating about it, because it reflects our lives as well. When I read your story, it kind of reminded me of the tiger in The Life of Pi being stuck on that boat with the tiger. Was that tiger really helping the boy, or was it just trying to survive, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I think that the fact that you know, I mean, I think all this goes back to the eyelessness of the xenomorph, the fact that it has no relatable features, the fact that we can't possibly understand what's going on in a life form that's that alien to us, you know, no pun intended, that's that foreign to us. And so, like, it, you know, regardless of the, you know, bioweapons type explanations of where they're from or any of that sort of stuff, like, it, no matter what, it's so far from our experience that we have no way of knowing. So we have to be reading it. It has to be about, you know, about that level of ambiguity, about what is it, does it, you know, does it want something? Is it just a monstrous killing machine? All these things are basically still, you know, open questions as far as I'm concerned in that world. So, and I like that. I think that it's a basic part of what makes aliens cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially the eyelessness thing. I mean, there was I worked on, so like in my storyboard life, I worked on this movie, Reign of Fire, years ago. It's about dragons, like, and it was, there was a big meeting with the head of Disney at the time who came in and was like, I don't know, I don't like, you know, and the dragon had tiny little eyes and it looks scary and stuff. And he's like, I don't know, I mean, I feel like in order to empathize, it needs to have big eyes. And, you know, because he came out of animation. And like, the whole idea was, well, of course you don't want to empathize with the antagonist of the movie. You know, it shouldn't be cute, you know? And like, I've always thought about that, and how, you know, how Giger got it so right, and Ridley Scott got it so right, to, even though in that first one there's the suggestion of a skull inside, which gives it a little bit more, you know, anthropomorphism, you know, but it's still, like, the getting that detail so right is so huge in, you know, in why that image and that iconography has persisted for so long.
Yeah, so true. If you had another opportunity to do another Aliens comic series, would you? And like, I obviously can't ask you what the story would be, because that would be giving away.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer. I mean, yes, I would, and I would do a story from like a decade later in this kid's life, Maxon's life. This kid who's now haunted by this horrible thing that happened to him, and the ways that, you know, he deals with it as an adult. You know, and yeah, I mean, look, if in a perfect world, I would do, you know, I'd do 2 more and have one of him as an old man, assuming he lives through the second one.
Yeah. Oh, I hope so. Maybe I could bug Randy on Twitter. Okay, and then his last question is, smooth dome or ridged dome alien? Which one's your preference?
My personal preference is the smooth dome. But the feeling in this was that they should have it should be the more ridged look because of, where it was in the,
in the timeline.
I mean, I mean, even though I don't want to pin down the timeline, still, it clearly is after Aliens and all that stuff. So,
Yeah. All right. So that's Brad's questions done. Thanks, Brad. Right. Sorry you couldn't make it. Now for my questions. So I know that there've been a lot of comparisons with Mute's story and stuff like that. One of the things that I felt passionate about is that the main character in any alien story should always be a woman. And I really couldn't even think of a male character being Ripley or anything. But you effectively made Maxim like still vulnerable, but a person, a character that could grow from a vulnerable place to someone strong and a survivor. And it completely blew my mind when your comic came out, because I was like really against it at first. And then when you introduced your character, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I really love this.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that idea? Like what made you go, you know what, I'm just going to make the boy the main character? I
certainly feel like what I absolutely did not want to do was a book about, Marines or, people who had already had agency and then have them somehow just get decimated by it, and blah, 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 right? I mean, to me, it has to be a story about vulnerability and a story about finding your way through a world. And to me, look, I was a kid who grew up with a single parent and didn't have money, and things were not, and didn't, not always secure, And so, to me, I felt very much like I've always felt that there's stories to be told about kids that are not from parents' point of view, and that there's a lot there, and there are a lot of dynamics in the lives of kids and the way that they can relate to the world that are more interesting than just parents worrying about kids. And so I just saw that as something that could be a vulnerable, interesting story where the kid has room to develop without I just really didn't want to tell a story about somebody who was powerful in the first place, and I almost never want to tell stories like that. We've done, Karina and I have done some, and I've done some superhero stuff. And the problem for me, storytelling wise, in that is that starting with somebody who is powerful and, and has it all together is not that interesting to me. There's nowhere to go in that story. Right. Yeah. And the way, and this world, in the aliens world, it can be, the characters are human. They have, and life is very precarious. And I feel like this is a kind of story that, while I always want to tell a story that is absolutely about the world it is in and not interchangeable with something else, it also has to be a story that can hold up on its own to some extent. And I wanted to tell a story that, where you could understand the vulnerability of this kid in the, whether there were xenomorphs or not. And, and I think that's, and I only want to tell stories about vulnerable characters. I only want to tell stories about, people where not only do they, they can grow from something, and, and this situation that they've gotten themselves into is enormously serious for them. It's also the most important thing that's happened to them in their lives, right? I don't want to tell stories about, the thing that just happens to happen to somebody who, continues on forever and it doesn't really matter, if it's a story, it needs to be, it's only a story to me if you're telling something that's just the most important thing that's ever happened to somebody, right? And certainly that would be the case for this kid, right? So.
Yeah, absolutely life-changing for him. And I really love how you ended it with him, like, effectively waking up at Gateway Station. Is it the same gateway that Ripley had been at?
I assumed that it was using the name sort of generically, as that there were more than that. I assumed that there would be more than that. I don't know if that's canon or not. I just felt like it would, that it's a familiar enough name, but not.
Yeah, I think there's one Gateway Station, but there are multiple versions of other stations because they constantly get destroyed in other stories.
Well,
so
I don't know. Maybe they're just calling it that. But okay. So it's the one she was at. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Fantastic. So let's go away from Dust to Dust and talk about your work. Now, you do storyboarding for films. Like you said, you were working on a film, but that's shuttered now. I know other people who work in the industry and they've had to stop their projects, or even some have started up, funnily enough, during the pandemic. Yeah. I guess people have found time. Well, how has that affected you in your profession? Like, what sort of future do you see if we have to continue on with this social distancing?
It's an enormous question, Mark. I mean, for the most part, my working on, I work very early in the process. I often come on before there's a script at all. I'm, as a storyboard artist, I'm often one of the very first people hired. So I'm working way out ahead, usually working way out ahead of production. And, really when all of this becomes serious is when you have to make the thing and everybody has to get together and be around each other. The extent that that will be possible is a real question mark. The question of whether productions will flee to places that have laxer rules, which is endangering the crew. But you don't know. Less reputable companies could do stuff like that. Or the possibility that, like here in California, it's possible that that there will just be a sort of mandatory testing that when that's a realistic thing, and that at whatever interval, everyone on set would just have to be tested all the time, in order to make it possible to do that stuff. I think that, but this is a completely open question, and everybody wants to know the answer to, but it's very scary times, for obviously there are much more immediate scary things about people's health and all that sort of stuff but there's also just the question of how the industry goes forward. And I just don't know. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. It's been, we're basically about at a month from the safer at home, month out from the safer at home order in Los Angeles. And, it's, and still nobody really knows. Nobody has any idea what's going on. So, for me personally, it's, the film I was working on, it's a big movie. It's something that people will want to see no matter what. And, I think that, and I worked on it for 2 months, and there's basically no script, and I was just working through, a lot of what I do is I come up with ideas and I design sequences, and regardless of whether there is a script or not and whatever, I come up with a lot of stuff. That's kind of what I do. And so I did that for 2 months, and then then they're basically laying off everybody who's non-essential for a while they work on the script. And so it may be that I come back and, continue to work from home on it. I work from home anyway. So that's, for the most part, it's not any different. I've been doing this, for 20 plus years, 23 years or something, since I was 22. And
wow.
The first movie I worked on was the first Austin Powers movie. And so I've worked in a lot of art departments, and I don't really care to work in the art department anymore. So for the most part, I make it so that I work from home anyway. my routine for working on the film was no different than any other. I work with a director I work with a lot. I do stuff, I email it to him, he gives me notes by email, or we talk on the phone. And like, that's exactly the same as it always was. So it didn't impact me in any way in that way. It impacts me that the job is, that things are so unstable, and that I'm not entirely sure what the future of my entire industry is. That's what I'm worried about,
Yeah. Oh, that's fair enough. So like, I know you did storyboarding for Interstellar. You also did an interview with Perfect Organism podcast, so I won't go too much into it. But what did you think about the movie, and what did you think about your contribution to it?
I can't speak with much authority on the final film of Interstellar because I've never seen it. I worked on it for several months, and
you have to watch it.
there are times when, well, here's the thing, like it gets like I've read the script a million times. I storyboarded almost the entire movie myself. I was the only storyboard artist on it, and weirdly, it was like I couldn't make it to the cast and crew screening, and then I just never got around to seeing the movie. Right? I know that sounds crazy, but it it feels like that's my job, and I lived in that world for a long time. And while I likely will see the movie, and I worked on Inception, that was kind of traumatizing, and I still saw that, but I went to the cast and crew screening, and and I liked that movie, and I thought that came out well and everything. And I'm not averse to seeing movies I worked on, but there are movies that I've worked on that I've never seen. So it's just true, like
Well, that's okay. Inception is a really good film. So.
Well, I love I love movies, and I watch a lot of movies, and there's part of me that feels like, well, I know everything about this movie. Like, I know this movie. I'm not going to find something surprising in this movie. I know this thing. That said, we went to the. I worked on Ford versus Ferrari, the Jim Mangold movie. We went to the premiere at the Chinese theater, and it was great, and it was an awesome experience. And I had actually already seen that movie in the cutting room just to do some little to work on some little reshoots. But it's nothing against Interstellar. I honestly don't know why I've never gotten around to watching Interstellar.
Okay, that's fair enough. As for conventions, now this year it's going to be very different for the convention scene, because everyone's going to be either streaming it, or there's going to be just a new way of doing conventions. I know you're not the biggest lover of conventions. Could you explain why to people who are watching this interview?
Mostly I just have a hard time sitting at the table. I do. I have a hard time sitting at a table and feeling like I could be spending my time in different ways. I don't like doing the commissions at the con because I don't think they come out as well, and doing commissions really isn't my thing anyway. I'm a storyteller. What I want to do is, I draw comics because I want to tell stories. I don't draw comics because I want to do pinups of superheroes, right? So there's nothing wrong with doing pinups of superheroes, and lots of people do amazing ones. But I don't feel like that's what I do best necessarily, and I don't really feel like I'm not passionate about that. I'm passionate about telling stories and sequential art. So the things that cons are about aren't exactly the reason why I'm doing this. So, but lots of people, they go to cons and they need to, they do it to make a living. And that's a huge part of, of their work and everything. But for me, the main thing I do to make a living outside of comics is movies. And it's incredibly difficult to schedule my movie work with the cons, right? So it's either that because nothing is ever worked out in advance on any of these fronts. So I either have to, I'll have to carve out time during the movie, because you can never travel to one just over the weekend or something. It's more time, like a week. That's often very difficult, If I mean, if somebody wonders why I don't want to go to these things, they can go talk to Christopher Nolan in person and try to convince him that that I should go to Atlanta during the making of Inception or whatever, right? Like, he's not a friendly, he's not a caring, effusive guy. He just doesn't care. He just wants you there to work on the movie, right? Like, it's just multiple things, you know? I mean, I have to make, you know, it's just very, very difficult for me to schedule. And I don't think the things that are, I'm not good at sitting at the table. I'm not patient enough to sit at the table. I don't mind going to them and doing signings at the booth, you know, at a booth, or, you know, doing panels. I like doing panels. Look, I like talking about this stuff, obviously, you know? So all that sort of stuff, that's fine. And actually, I like interacting with the fans. I just don't, I don't know that it's apparent from the fan side the crazy amount of time you have to set aside to travel to someplace and, you know, make that work with the other work in your schedule and all the other stuff. It got to a point where it was just not workable enough for me.
Yeah, for me, when I experience conventions, either as a cosplayer or as part of the press, it's tiring because you're right. There's like weeks and weeks of preparation, and then you're there, and then you're constantly moving, or you have to sit down, and you're busting to go to the toilet.
Right, but it's also like you know, if you're going you know, and it's like your job, then your job is to sit at the table and, you know, and sell the books and do, you know, maybe do commissions or something. And the, you know, the commissions become an issue as well because people often want things that are not things that I'm particularly interested in doing. And, you know, well, I mean, I don't know. I would dance around, but we had this whole incident in New York Comic Con where there was someone outside of the con selling copies of my commissions that they had printed out on the internet for $4 a piece, right? Literally in New York City, in front of Javits Center, on the sidewalk where you exit the con. Right?
That is so fucking rude. Oh my God.
So everyone is telling me, hey, there's somebody outside selling your stuff. And I'm inside, I'm selling them for a price, you know, they're my original work and whatever, right? Yeah. And this person is outside selling them for nothing because they printed them off the internet. And so the final day of the thing, Corinne and I are walking out, and there's the person, they're selling the things. And I was like, you know, I drew those, and it's not cool that you're selling them and undercutting me trying to like make a living inside there. And they just, you know, said, well, no, these are free. I got them off the internet. They're free. You don't, you know, and it went bad. So like, it was kind of it was a really clear illustration of how, you know, like, it's a lot of work, it's difficult, and it's difficult to even just break even going to cons a lot of the time. So like, at that point I was kind of like, you know, maybe I can take a break from this for a while. Now we're all taking a kind of enforced break from it. So, you know, I don't really, you know, we'll see how I feel coming out of the other side of it. I never intended to never do cons again. I say a lot of extreme things, that I'm never going to do something again, that I'm like, you know, and that often doesn't turn out to be the case. So okay. Like, that I'll never do commissions. I'm sure I'll do commissions. Right? So, and I think that my, you know, certainly my persona on Twitter or whatever, and it sounds more sort of serious and extreme than I'm ever really intending for this to be.
Well, so like, I thoroughly enjoy it. So
yeah. And so I mean, once we come out of all this stuff, we'll see where I'm at as far as doing conventions. That was a long answer.
It's okay. That's not a problem. What is your favorite science fiction film or comic? Because I know for a long time you had Image from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, well, actually, that as my avatar, you mean? Yeah, that actually, it wasn't. That was actually on Interstellar, right? I was working in the art department, and and now, because I have to think of it, I will forget his name, even though he's like incredibly famous model maker who worked on everything, going back to like the first Star Trek movie and stuff. He was a model maker on the show, on the film, sorry. And he brought in some stuff from his collection, and he had one of the helmets from 2001, and it wasn't a reproduction. It was really one of the helmets from 2001, right?
Oh my God!
It was from the sequence on the moon, right? Like where they've dug out the first monolith we see in the 2001, and it was one of the white ones, and so and he's like, oh, here, he like brought it in for everybody because we were working on an Interstellar and space oriented stuff, and I was just like, I couldn't have been more thrilled about this. I mean, obviously, I love that movie. I love Kubrick, and so like the photo that I had as my avatar was me wearing that helmet, right? So
really,
so like
I thought it was like a screenshot from the film or something.
No. So like when I put on, and this is like they made that movie in England in the '60s, so like these are these like middle-aged smoking actor guys, right? And when 50 years later or whatever, I put on this helmet and you could still smell the stale cigarette smoke inside of it, right? But but it was the greatest, just things like that bring you close to something that is so iconic and so interesting. And the way that he got that was that they were just throwing it away at MGM. Like he wasn't even in the industry yet, and went in and heard that they were getting rid of some stuff, and they were just throwing out stuff at in dumpsters.
Is this before they do prop store sales and stuff like that? Oh
yeah, this was probably in the early '70s, right? So
wow.
And so like so he basically just stole it out of the dumpster and kept it all these years. And so like I love that. I mean, like I've certainly interacted with stuff. I have a photo of me wearing like the Magneto helmet from the X-Men movies and stuff as well. But something that that's just some movie I worked on. Like who cares? Like this is something that to me that's movies. Stanley Kubrick and 2001, and that's and certainly 2001 would be an answer for a favorite sci-fi movie. Although another answer would certainly be Ridley Scott's Alien and Cameron's Aliens, and and really a lot of other stuff. Relatively broad taste in this sort of thing, and I if I had the chance to think about it, I could give you better, more informed answers. But as far as comics go, one thing I love is the manga Pluto, which is incredible storytelling, and I can't remember his name either at the moment, okay. But there was just a gallery show of his stuff in LA last year that was enormously inspiring at a point when I was having a hard time being inspired by stuff. So,
Fantastic. And one more question before you go. Is there a comic series, if you had an opportunity to like re-panel and redo someone else's comic series as a homage, paid work, what would you choose to redo in your sort of vision?
That's a tough question in a way for me, because I feel like the things that are worth redoing are the things that didn't work in the first place. And so like, and I've always felt like, there's kind of two modes for working on freelance things. There's either you love it and you want to do something that's kind of a part of that world, like with Aliens, or or even Planet of the Apes. I love Planet of the Apes, and I loved working in that world, but especially because of the kinds of stories you can tell and the kinds of conflicts you can have. And then there's the other stuff like a Green Lantern, where it wasn't that we were huge fans of Green Lantern. It was that was something that that we looked at and we're like, well, it has these elements to it. It's it's in space. It's got aliens. It's got things that that can be exotic from the point of view of someone from Earth. Exoticism is not really something that is acceptable, rightly not acceptable in stuff about other cultures on Earth. But you can kind of do it in science fiction, and the kinds of thing and there were opportunities to exploit stuff that they don't do when you're telling a story, for 50 years and it's supposed to be the same guy and it's the same every month. You can have, you can show how dangerous space is, or his inability to use the green ring and his amateurishness at it or whatever. Like those kind of things of finding the vulnerabilities and stuff. That's what interests me. So that was more like we were going. Neither of us are big Green Lantern fans. We thought that there were opportunities to tell a story in that world. So but there are I'm sure there are other things that are certainly but my preference would be to try to tell some news stories.
Cool. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me and taking time out of your schedule to talk to us fans as well.
I'm sorry that it took so long.
That's okay. It was partially me too. I was busy as well, but now that we've got all the time in the world, it helps.
Yeah.
So just want to wish everybody a happy Alien Day. Thank you for watching our 14 odd hours of the Studio Yutani Megacast. Gabriel, is there anything else you'd like to say to fans out there?
I just want to say happy Alien Day.
Fantastic. Happy Alien Day, everybody. See you later.